This week on the All-American Legacy Podcast.
It didn't matter where you were on that beachhead, they could see you and shoot at you and everything else. I ended up basically on what they call the Mussolini Canal.
People that are together in their adversity develop a certain bond. But obviously in combat, it's a relationship unlike any other. It's not a natural relationship.
Our job was to block off the crossroads and set up roadblocks, put the landmines where we could keep the tanks from getting to the coast, to save the guys, to help the guys that were landing at Utah Beach and Omaha Beach.
And if you're with them, with the unit and with the guys that you're fighting with any length of time, you get to know them, you develop a very strong bond that carries on actually eternity to this day.
So it was hectic. I jumped out of the plane with the idea I was going to be a radio operator. You know, like, the equipment wasn't there, so I ended up being just a regular soldier. Eventually, on the second day, we started to regroup, and then they brought in the radar equipment, and that too was damaged. Back home, they always refer to me as a hero. I'm no hero. And I always keep saying that the heroes are buried here. Those are the heroes.
This is the 82nd Airborne Division, fearless among fighting units.
From Fort Bragg, home of the airborne and the center of the military universe, this is the All-American Legacy Podcast. An inside look at the 100-year history of the 82nd.
They are all American all the way.
Welcome back to the All-American Legacy Podcast. This is your host, Joe Bacino. We don't have very many World War II paratroopers left. The ones we do have left may not be with us for too much longer. We must cherish them, their accomplishments for our world, and their stories. Their legacy is not just about the 82nd Airborne Division and about our spirit, culture, and values, but about our nation and its best attributes. We're working our way through World War II, and over the last few episodes we've given you the history, the places, the generals, and the strategy. Well, in this episode, we want you to hear from the paratroopers themselves. Their stories in their own words. These are accounts of intense human drama, of the human experience at its most meaningful. These are memories of fear, of courage, of love. It was Patton who said that battle is the most magnificent competition in which a human being can indulge. It brings out all that is best. It removes all that is base. These stories bear that out. We'll start with Herbert Adams, who served in D Company 504th. Here he talks about participating in the seaborne assault at Anzio, and then moving to England to train for Operation Market Garden.
Well, the first combat I saw was on the Anzio beachhead. And unfortunately for that, it didn't matter where you were on that beachhead, they could see you and shoot at you and everything else. I ended up basically on what they call the Mussolini Canal, and part of it. The only disadvantage of that was we had we call bed check Charlie, a plane would come over, put in there every night, and drop bombs all up and down along the canal, because apparently even at night, you could see the outline of that canal. So they knew the Americans were there, so they dropped the bombs on us and part of it. So. Well, after Anzio, then I went to England, and we were stationed in a little town, quite a big city of Leicester, England. And due to the fact that we'd been fighting all winter while everybody else sat in sunny England, because the unit was pretty well beat up. They put us in reserve. And I volunteered during the month of May, 2 to 3 times a week. You'd go out and get on one of the C-47s, and there'd be two guys on the plane, 2 paratroopers. And the planes would you'd have guys, navigators, were trying to learn how to navigate at night and so forth. And we might fly 10 minutes, you might fly a half hour over different places, and then you jump out. The first guy would jump, and the next guy would jump 19 seconds later. That would be approximating what it would be to unload the plane if you had it full of paratroopers. And you wouldn't be on the ground, I wouldn't think, more than 5 minutes before you knew where you were. Because if somebody pointed a shotgun at you, or a pitchfork, or something else, the British Home Guard, it was all over the place. Apparently they saturated those open fields at night. They didn't want the Germans parachuting in for fifth column and all the rest of it. But as soon as you could convince the British who you were, you take a map and they mark it where you landed. Well, some of the nights we weren't on the map at all. We'd be maybe 20 miles from where we were supposed to be and stuff like that.
In 1942, James Magellan was a senior at Ripon College in Wisconsin. Like a lot of young men who survived the Great Depression, his future was uncertain. The Japanese had attacked Pearl Harbor. The clouds of conflict were gathering over our nation. America was mobilizing for another world war. He wanted to serve. Not just serve, but he wanted to fight, to participate in close combat, and he wanted to do so as quickly as possible. Magellan joined ROTC and entered the Army as a signal officer. During his officer training, he grew restless. He wanted to get out of training. He wanted to get into combat. He was told the fastest way to get to the fight was to become a paratrooper, so he did. He went to Fort Benning, to Airborne School, and was then assigned to the 82nd Airborne Division as a platoon leader. His fellow paratroopers called him Maggie. Here, in an interview with the Pritzker Military Museum and Library, Maggie talks about his buddy Rivers, whom he wrote about in his book All the Way to Berlin. He served with Rivers throughout the war, in Anzio and Holland. In this piece, Maggie talks about the bond between all American paratroopers in World War II.
He came from Massachusetts. He was a lieutenant, as I was, when we went through parachute school. And we seemed to be brought together in everything we did at Fort Benning. And from there on, till the end of our military career, we were inseparable. Whether it was fate brought us together, we did the same things. We sailed on the same ship, on Liberty ship, crossed the Atlantic, went to Africa. We both were lieutenants, platoon leaders. Then when we were assigned to the 82nd Airborne Division, we were assigned to the same rifle company. And that continued on all through the war till the end of the war. We were absolutely inseparable. And we would do things together that you wouldn't read about in the infantry manuals in terms of tactics. It was the war was on, and we were both, you used the term hell-bent for election to get on with it. And so it developed a very close relationship. People that are together in their adversity develop a certain bond. But obviously in combat, it's a relationship unlike any other. It's not a natural relationship. And if you're with them, with a unit and with the guys that you're fighting with, any length of time you get to know them, you develop a very strong bond that carries on actually eternity to this day. And I don't refer to it as a brotherhood because that doesn't adequately describe that relationship as strong as that. It's not genetic and it's not biological. It's a relationship that is forged under the most difficult kinds of conditions that brings you together. And if you survive that, as Rivers and I did, it led to an occasion, which I've mentioned, and that is, we had been pulled back out of the Battle of the Bulge after we had been there a period of time and had seen quite a bit of action. We pulled back to thaw out, rest a little, and receive replacements before going back on the line and continue the attack to get into Germany. And while we were back in this particular village where we were resting, and the Belgians had put us up, we were living with families or anywhere we could in this village. The USO had brought in a movie, as they would do from time to time when troops were off the front lines or back in the rear, and they'd show a movie, and they were black and white. They come over and set up a projector, darken out a room, and the one that I recall was in a bombed-out house, and they were showing this movie. Rivers said, let's go and say this. So we did. And we were over, and we were seated in a couple of chairs there, and about halfway through the movie, I got a tap on my shoulder and looked around, and it was our Catholic chaplain, Father Kozak. Now, Rivers was Catholic, and he was part of Father Kozak's flock, so to speak. And he came in, but he tapped me on the shoulder. He said to me, Maggie, he says, come outside a minute, I want to talk to you. So I walked outside, and it was dark, in a little town called Remochamps in Belgium. And he said to me, we just got some bad news from Red Cross. Rivers' brother, Roland, was killed in action in France. Now he said, you know, I'm his chaplain, but you're closer to him than anyone else, and I think you should be the one to tell him that. I said, okay. I went back in, sat down for a minute, tapped Rivers and said, look, come outside, I want to talk to you about it. I don't care about this movie anyway. He said, okay. So we went out, we started walking down this street, it darkened out, to where we were billeted for that night. And after I got out a little ways, I stopped. And I turned and looked at him, right squarely as I'm looking at you, and I said, Rivers, I got some bad news for you. Your brother Roland has been killed. Just got word from the Red Cross. I didn't go into any further details. Now, bear in mind, this was well in the Battle of Bulge. We had fought through Italy. We'd had replacements at least a half a dozen times in our company. We saw a lot of men killed. We killed a lot ourselves. But here somebody's telling you your only brother had just been killed in action. And it slowed him up for a minute, looked at me, didn't say anything. He showed no outward sign of emotion. I knew that he was tearing up inside, and just looked at me and turned and started walking. We hadn't gone maybe 15 paces, and he turned and looked at me again, and he said, and I'm looking at you, he says, you know, Maggie, he said, all I ever had in this life was you and my brother Roland. But he said, if one of you had to go, I guess it had to be Roland. Now here's your best buddy in combat telling you that if it was an option with him, if he had in any way could dictate what would happen, his brother would go before I would. Now, how do you call that a relationship brothers? You can't. Yeah. But it only develops after a period of time when you've gone through quite a bit, as we had done. Mm-hmm. And that pretty much dictated the relationship I had with him all through the end of the war and after the war, for a long time. And of course, he's not with us any longer, but I really like to point that out because I don't think in the writings that I've seen about relationships, there's a close bond between men, anybody adequately expressed it. Mm-hmm. And you can't if you don't experience it yourself.
Maggie would go on to become the most decorated officer in division history. He is a legend. He fought in the mountains outside Naples, in Anzio, and the Battle of the Bulge. Here he talks about his combat jump into Holland.
We made a daylight jump in Holland, and we were under heavy fire. It had been for quite a while since we penetrated into Holland. For 45 minutes, bullets were whistling through the plane. And normally, with paratroopers, you give the series of jump commands about 5 minutes before you jump, because there's a sweating out time in standing hooked up before you jump. And while we were doing it, bullets were whistling through the plane, and two of my guys were hit. And so we couldn't wait to get out of the plane. And a series of jump commands would go something like this. It would start out, stand up, you would be seated. I gave that command 45 minutes before we jumped. And normally I said it'd be 5. Then it was hook up, and you'd hook up to the static line. And then the next one would be check your equipment. So each person would check the equipment of the person in front of them, make sure his chute was okay and it was fastened and everything seemed to be ready to go for the jump. And then sound off for equipment check. Then it'd say, number 16 okay, number 15 okay. And then you'd pause until you reach the drop zone. And I'd be looking out for the field. I knew about where we were going to jump. And all this frustration was building up, and these guys standing up and bullets are whistling through this plane. And I gave the command you just gave me, are you ready? And what I said was just a minor mirror of the blood-curdling yell that came out of the paratroopers at that point. They were ready, had been ready, wanted to go. And I said, yeah. And then we got over the field, I said, let's go, and we exited that plane in record time. And I might add, Not only was it a record time, but the descent to the ground was the least we'd ever had. The pilots were also getting shot at up front, and they brought us in as low as they could, about 500 feet. And we jumped out of there, and our chutes barely opened when we hit the ground.
James Magellas turned 100 earlier this year. So let's transition to D-Day stories. Here's Don Jakeway. Don served in the 508th during the war. This is his story about D-Day and the fight in Normandy.
Our job was to block off the crossroads and set up roadblocks, put the landmines where we could keep the tanks from getting to the coast, to save the guys, to help the guys that were landing at Utah Beach and Omaha Beach. The night of June the 5th, they finally told us we were going. So we loaded the planes about 15 after 10 and took off for Normandy. Very little bit of talking, not much said. Everybody was thinking their own thoughts. I know I thought, I lived on a farm all my life. I don't figure I ever hurt anybody in my life that way, but we'd been taught to kill. And we were told strict orders, and for the first 10 days you take no prisoners. So you think about this. Could you just look at a person head on and shoot them? So we jumped at I'd say we were about not quite 500 feet. When I looked down, far as you could see was water. They had flooded all the area from the Mederet River, and I fortunately came down. I landed in a tree in a small churchyard in the countryside. I could hear the firing and stuff going on up ahead of me. First few days I kind of hid in the daytime. I'd travel a little bit at night. And I picked up some food and stuff out of cellars and things like potatoes or carrots. And then on the 10th day, I got back to my unit. The very next day, we crossed the Mederet River on some little boats that they had, and we had a big firefight with the Germans. So we dug in, then all at once, there were some mortars come in from them. About that time, there was a 88 round come in short, and I raised up, and just as I did, I looked down, and about halfway between the chateau and our foxholes, a German medic got up, picked up a wounded German soldier, put him on his shoulder, and turned and walked right directly away from us. And I yelled to all my people there to hold their fire because we don't shoot a medic. The guy went on down, crossed the wall, and it wasn't 15 minutes later, we heard a noise coming up the road, and there was 61 German prisoners surrendered to us. Now, if we'd have shot that medic, they would have never surrendered. Well, I consider myself to be very fortunate. In our company alone, there was 130, and we come out with 39. That's Normandy. That's just Normandy.
Ralph Ticcione was a radio operator with the 82nd Airborne during World War II, and here's his D-Day story.
We come in around 5 o'clock in the morning. The pilots missed the drop zone, so it was hectic. I jumped out of the plane with the idea I was going to be the radio operator. The equipment wasn't there, so I ended up being just a regular soldier. Eventually, on the second day, we started to regroup. And then they brought in the radar equipment, and that too was damaged. Back home, they always refer to me as a hero. I'm no hero. And I always keep saying that the heroes are buried here. Those are the heroes.
Here is another All-American D-Day paratrooper, Leslie P. Cruz Jr.
Well, we boarded, and everything was tight, and of course we're all nervous about this thing. We know that this is going to happen now, and I was very impressed by the thundering noises of all the planes that were winding up their engines at the same time, and then one by one they would peel out into the runway, and we got up in the air and got into formation. And then we crossed the channel heading to the western side of the peninsula of Cottonton. As we hit the coast, we all were commanded to stand up and be ready to jump. So we all got up and packed there, and then we started to get the flak. And of course the pilots, they wanted to get this thing over and get back into English soil. Everybody went out just like lightning. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, whatever there were in the plane. I was near the end, and we all went out. So I came down and fell backward and hit my head on the soil, the French soil, and then my helmet came forward, hit me on the nose. Vargas's head was at my shoulder, and a shell hit right to his right side and blew his leg and thigh apart. So I stayed with him and I tried to do whatever I could to ease his pain. I gave him a shot of penicillin, and I also prayed with him. It's a part of my life that you just can't let go of. You know, it's there and it's always there.
So those were their stories in their words. I should take the opportunity to say here that many people have written us about our segment a few episodes back about the cricket clicker. We question whether paratroopers were issued the cricket device before D-Day, as depicted in the movie The Longest Day. Well, we asked Command Sergeant Major Rock Merritt, a World War II legend who jumped into Normandy, and here's what he told us. Quote, "I don't care what anyone says, the 82nd was not issued the cricket." End quote. The All-American Legacy podcast staff were going to St. Mary-Glise in France in June to observe the commemoration of the 73rd anniversary of our paratroopers' actions on D-Day. We will release a special episode on June 6th with footage from St. Mary-Glise. It won't exactly be live, but it'll be close to live, and we're pretty excited about it. So look for that episode, and that does it for this episode. This program, the All-American Legacy Podcast, is a remarkable effort. It's put together by the 82nd Airborne Division Public Affairs Office, myself, Master Sergeant Dan Bailey, and Sergeant First Class Alex Burnett. We can't do it without the help of Brian Bird each and every week. Today, we must also thank the Pritzker Military Library and Museum for allowing us to use their interview with James Magellan, and to the World War II Museum for allowing us to use their interview with Colonel John Moore. Thanks, and tune in next week.